All right, good morning, Addison. We miss you. We're sorry for your loss of your family. If you get a chance to watch this, we're going to just go over uh, the very end of Dorothy Mills that you guys read, and then we're going to play a game of Jeopardy so you can play at home. I'll try to read the questions out loud and clear here. Um, that's really loud drinking. That's funny. That's the dog drinking. So we finished up, obviously no reading questions. Just talk a little bit about Roman society. And I know it's very distracting. Bailey is drinking very loudly in the kitchen, just FYI. The first was talking about Roman men and women. What she really wants to be petted. There you go. Give the obligatory pet. I'm sorry, now you have water on your arm, I can see. We didn't talk about this a lot for the Greeks. Well, let me ask you first of all, what impression did you get of Roman women's lives?
They're more involved, I guess, in the
Okay,
Greek ones.
more involved than the Greek ones. Greek women, it's kind of weird because Greek women are sort of expected to stay indoors and handle the home. And it's not as mean as it sounds like today because somebody needs to handling a household is a large job. And if you have servants, if you have slaves and you're managing the slaves, then that's a lot of work. But Roman women had rights that Greek women did not have. So they were a little more involved. Greek women could not bring any sort of public action, like a law or a lawsuit or anything, without male representation. And for Roman women, that wasn't so much the case. Although it was still thought that Roman women would be taking care of business at home, which is not a mean thing. Like I said, the Proverbs 31 woman, takes care of business at home too. But the first thing I noticed, I just highlighted things in here that struck me. Amidst all the change, okay, the change of becoming an empire, the change of having all this luxury come into Rome, the Roman never lost his love of country life. A Roman gentleman of the last century of the Republic took a keen and active interest in all the affairs of the city, but he was not a lover of the city life as was the Athenian. So the city-state in Greece, which is the city and then the surrounding area that it governs, okay? It's called a polis. Yeah. So you can hear politics. The citizen was called a polites. In other words, the city and citizenship, we listen to the words I just said. City, citizenship. They went together. And not so much for the Romans. It wasn't, I have to live in Rome to be a full active citizen. They would go to Rome frequently. If you lived but remember, probably not, I don't know, if you lived 10 miles away from Rome, that'd be a trip. If you lived 5 miles away from Rome, you're not going to go every day. But their lives were more based in their country house. And we read about that in the houses. Remember, we talked about when it gets nasty in Rome, if I have the money and I've got one of those seaside villas or a farmhouse or a country estate, I'm going to go there. And that's where they really spent their time. Whereas in Greece, the city is where it's happening. Even if you're a farmer, you come to the city all the time because that's where if you're in Athens, that's where the assembly meets. That's where you get to vote on things. I was in my Greek book that I was working on, very slowly. One of the sentences I had to translate was, we do not consider someone who does not take part in the affairs of the city a quiet citizen. We consider him bad. So, but the Romans, we like to go to the country. And we talked a lot about that, country estates, country life. I'm not going to hit that real hard. And then, yes, there was a very long section here about getting married.
Oh, yeah.
Just an inordinately long section about getting married. But interestingly, did you notice the carrying across the threshold? Are you familiar with this? A lot of people don't. I mean, have you? No. So it's in movies, you'll see it. It was a thing even 30 years ago that when you get back home after the wedding, the wife doesn't step across the threshold, she gets carried in. So if you watch movies, sometimes you'll see a guy carrying his wife in. It has to be a pretty old movie. And that's actually a Roman custom. The giving of rings was a Roman custom. We get a lot of marriage customs from them, and so perhaps that's why they felt that you needed several pages on Romans getting married and a whole wedding hymn.
Maybe that's why they call it romance.
It's not, but I'm not going to go into that. But that's very good. And then there is a section about slaves, servants, and this is something Rome and Greece have in common: slave labor. And we need to remember this. First of all, Americans, it's difficult to talk about slavery because we have a certain image of slavery that is not the ancient image of slavery, although some slaves had it very bad. In Greece, there were silver mines just to the south of Athens, and often slaves were sent to the mines, which would be the equivalent of, selling a slave in America down south to work on a plantation. Maybe worse. I don't know. But a lot of slaves were just captured people, and you've probably gathered this. Well, Esca, right? Why is he a slave? Because he was captured. But the difference is there was no racial connection. You could be a Greek from another Greek city and be a slave in this Greek city because you were conquered. So I'm prepping for next year and reading a bunch of, because next year is the ancient Greece for my high schoolers, and reading the accounts of the Peloponnesian War and everything. Every time they take a city, and the women and children were sold as slaves. Bailey is snoring under the table. The Romans did the same thing. When they conquered, they took conquered peoples and they enslaved them, and they brought them back to Rome. But for many of those slaves, it was more what we would call household servants. Same in Greece, right? So a butler or a maid or something like that. I'm not saying, yay, we like to be slaves. The fox was a slave, right? And other than the fact that the king of Glome was kind of unstable emotionally, he didn't have a bad life, right? He wasn't beaten. He was intelligent. He was a tutor. He was an administrative assistant. But he wasn't free to leave, and that's the important thing. So when we talk about slavery, it's not like American slavery, but also remember slavery is not a good thing. But America is not the only country who ever had slaves. Almost every country in the ancient world had slaves. Europe had slaves up until, like 100 years, 150 years before our Civil War. We were just one of the last holdouts in the West to have slaves. Muslim countries had slaves. Doesn't make it a good thing, but puts it in perspective. But interestingly, there was a section in here. Augustus and Livia lived far more simply than any other imperial family, yet Livia alone had 600 servants and freedmen attached to her household. Do you remember this? She had a keeper of her purple robes, of her mourning dresses, of her imperial robe, of her state robes, of her overcoats. She had folders of clothes, and a hairdresser, a keeper of perfumery, 8 goldsmiths, and many other jewelers, keeper of her imperial shoes and of her sandals. Like, apparently that was 2 different jobs. Regulator for the hot and cold water for her bath. That's my favorite. Don't you feel like that would not be a very hard job?
Keeping your bath
Keeping her bath hot or cold? Because how often is she taking a bath? Okay. I mean, maybe every day, but not all day long. Keeper of her chair. What do you have to not lose it? What does that mean? There was also a governess for the favorite pet dog. And a keeper of the family portraits. What are they going to do? Run away?
Dust.
You dust them every day? This does not seem so bad. However, a country slave had very little opportunity of gaining his freedom. He could run away, but if caught, he was cruelly flogged and branded with the letter F for fugitivus, runaway, on his forehead. Not good.
Oh, that's what that was. I saw at my book. I think it was the Osborne book.
Yes.
There was like a slave with an F on his forehead, or like it was very small because it was
Oh, yes.
out like picture of the whole house on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
He had like this little mark on his forehead. I thought that was just a mistake of the author.
Ooh, you think it was in this book here that